welcome to my show. I'm Liz Harcharik and this is the European Palette. And today we're going to go back to France and we're going to prepare one of those great classics of French cuisine, a Blanquette de Veau. A Blanquette de Veau is a veal stew that you finish off with a lovely liaison of cream and egg yolks to make it very rich. It's very tasty, very typical in France. As our appetizer we're going to prepare an anchoyade. Now an anchoyade is a kind of anchovy sauce, and this is the very first thing that I learned to cook when I was taking my Provençal cooking classes many years ago in France. And before then I'd never really even considered eating anchovies and certainly not cooking with them, and through that class I discovered how wonderful it was to flavour my dishes with anchovies, garlic, bay leaves, thyme, all those lovely Provençal aromats and flavourings. And for dessert, pears in white wine. And one of my favourite dinner party desserts has always been pears in red wine because it's quite light, but that syrup is lovely. Now I found a new recipe which called for using muscat. Muscat de Baume de Venise is one of the famous dessert wines from France. However, muscat is a little on the pricey side, so I've decided that I'm going to substitute my muscat for white wine, and it comes out though as a wonderful deep red colour because we're going to put a slice of beetroot in it. The beetroot adds colour, a wonderful scarlet colour. It also adds a slightly earthy taste, and it's quite a sort of dinner party talking point because it's hard to tell what that taste is, but I think it's quite spectacular. Now, talking about beetroot, once you've bought your beetroot, they always come in one of those bunches. Did you know that you can keep those beetroot leaves? Well, I'm going to show you what to do with your beetroot leaves, and actually I'm going to jump over to Italy just to show you a quick way of making a very satisfying soup using those beetroot leaves. Well, let's get started. The Blanquette de Veau. Now, the Blanquette de Veau is going to use a couple of pounds of stewing veal. It's not the cheapest thing, so this is really something to do as a special treat. My family in France love this meal, and this would be a favourite birthday dish of one of my friends. So you want to warm in a pan a tablespoon of oil, not olive oil, just regular cooking oil, vegetable oil, and 2 tablespoons of butter. And when it's hot, you're going to add your meat. Now just stand back a little bit in case it spits. Now don't worry if a little bit of blood gets into the pan, it's going to get cooked off. There's no worry about contamination or bacteria, not with the heat at which you're going to cook. And now we're going to brown the meat. So you need to have the heat up quite high. When you put the meat in, that immediately brings the temperature down, so you want to bring it back up again. And it's tempting to toss it around, but you might want to just leave it for a couple of minutes and then start turning it over. Okay, now then, when you've browned your meat, and that just means that you've cooked it so that the pink has disappeared, you're not frying it, you're not making it all crispy, then we're going to add about a tablespoon of flour, and this is to absorb the liquid that's come off the meat and also to slightly thicken your sauce. The liaison of the cream and the egg yolk is going to thicken the sauce as well. So I'm just going to stir that in a little bit. There you go. You can see immediately how it thickens there. And then we're going to add enough warm water to just barely cover the meat, and then we're just going to let it stew for about 40 minutes. Now if you happen to have some nice stock hanging around, say chicken stock or vegetable stock, there's nothing to stop you using it, but you don't have to because we're going to be adding some extra flavours later on. And also you're using it hot just because then it won't take so long to get up to the heat. So this is what I mean by barely covering it. There we go. And then just bring that up to a boil and then simmer it covered for about 40 minutes. Now for the pears in white wine, I am going to bring to boil 2 cups of white wine. And while that's steadily heating, I'm going to add some orange, a couple of bay leaves, a cinnamon stick. Now if you can't find cinnamon sticks, a little sprinkling of cinnamon will do. And then our magic ingredient, some slices of beetroot, and this is raw beetroot that's just been peeled. Be careful with your hands and with your clothes because it does stain. Okay, that's going in there. Now because the original recipe called for muscat, which is a very sweet dessert wine, I'm going to add a little bit more sugar than you ordinarily would. If you do opt to go for the muscat, and I would definitely encourage you to try it if you're feeling extravagant, just 1 tablespoon of sugar will do, but here we're going to add 3 tablespoons. There we are. Now I'll put the lid on. That'll help it come to the boil. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about these pears. Now when you're cooking with pears and you'd want to prepare them a little ahead of time, I would suggest you have a little bit of lemon juice to hand. That really helps stopping the pears go brown. So you can do this. I actually put about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice in and I tossed them. I used bottled lemon juice. And then you can have them standing by in the fridge. These are Bartlett pears. Now when you go to the store there's quite an array of pears and you can choose whichever you want. I always go for the Bartlett when I'm cooking them. And this is the equivalent of 3 average sized Bartlett pears, and I have quartered them and cored them and peeled them. Alright, that is definitely boiling. So now you're going to add the pears. Note how I put the spoon down on a dish rather than directly on the surface. You always have to be careful what you're doing with your utensils. Now I would suggest at this point to use a wooden spoon. Pears are very, very fragile fruit, and if you use a stainless steel spoon you might cut into them inadvertently and that would be a shame. There we go. Now I'm actually being careful not to put that lemon juice in at the same time. Now you just know that you'd never get that colour with red wine. So this is rather an exciting dish, I think. There we go. That's pretty much all there is to it. It's very straightforward. Put the lid on again just to bring it back to the boil, and when it's boiling take the lid off and let it simmer for about 35 to 40 minutes until the liquid is bubbly. Now I'm preparing the toast for our enchoyade, and the best bread to use for this is day-old bread, probably a baguette. Fresh bread tends to crumble a little more easily, and I've made them quite thin slices, about 1/4 inch wide, and I've already brushed oil on the underside and I'm just finishing off putting oil on the top. I used to slice the bread and put it in a Ziploc bag and then add some oil and some seasoning and shake it all up, but I find actually that you get a more thorough and even coating if you do it this way, so a little bit more labour intensive but probably more efficient in the end. So let's just do a quick dab there. Now I can never quite decide whether I want to broil these or whether I want to bake them. So I've decided that since I'm going to get on with other things in the kitchen, it's probably safer to put them in the oven, 375 degrees, than to put them under the broiler and have to keep an eye on them. So I would say about 10 minutes at 375 degrees, then turn them over and do another 5 minutes. You'll know they're ready by the nice golden colour. And now for the enchoyade. Now the great thing about an enchoyade is it's very few ingredients, very quick to put together, and as I said, it's got very punchy taste. Now once you develop your liking for anchovies, you can use them in different recipes. For example, you can slip a few in a beef stew. It's amazing, it gives a lot of depth to that beef stew. Also, I like using anchovy paste and spreading it over puff pastry and then twisting it up and baking it that way. It makes a lovely salty, slightly fishy appetizer. Anyway, so we need 2 cans of anchovies, 2 ounces each, then 2 tablespoons of olive oil and a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. Of course you don't need salt because the anchovies are salted as they are. So I used to do this in a bowl and now I just do it straight into my pan. Not a non-stick pan, just a regular stainless steel pan will do here, so you can use a fork. Now first of all, you're going to heat the oil that came with the anchovies. This is, as you will have gathered, quite an oily sort of starter, but you know, oil is something that comes from France, from the south of France. It's all very apropos. There we go. And as that's heating, then you can start to add the anchovies themselves. Now I would go for the flat fillets of anchovies rather than the rolled ones, but it doesn't really matter. And When I'm doing a lot of cooking, I like to have my kitchen trash right by me. We do this in the cooking school, in aubergines, etc. So that instead of walking around the kitchen with trash or dripping things across the floor, you can just sort of throw it all in there. I like to line my bowl with a plastic bag, and then you can just sort of wrap it all up and put it in the trash afterwards. And of course your landing tray, which just means that you don't have drippy things all over your counter. And also it's a little more hygienic than putting your utensils directly on the countertop. So you can hear that sizzling, and there's a marvellous, marvellous smell. Now, anchovies actually just sort of melt. So even though you can see the fillet right now, or as we say in England, fillets, you're not going to see them soon. They're just going to melt. And I'm going to add my 2 tablespoons of extra olive oil. And finally, a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. I love these little measuring cups here. I actually find for measuring liquids they're actually a lot easier to use than a spoon. In we go. And that's going to give it a little kick. Not that there aren't any kicks in this anyway. So I'm kind of oily. But that's okay. Alright, then we're just going to let that bubble away for about 5 minutes, not much longer. See how that's starting to melt in? Now the pièce de résistance, a couple of cloves of garlic finely minced. I like to add my garlic a couple of minutes before the end of cooking because I don't like to run the risk of it getting burnt in that bubbling oil. So let's just put that in and let it finish cooking for 1 or 2 minutes before we transfer it to our plate. So at the end of the cooking, you just want to select a nice bright coloured bowl which will contrast with the not so lovely colour of the anchovies, and just pour it in there. There we go. And the smell is absolutely gorgeous. And I would say to you, if you really take a liking for this combination of flavours, the anchovy, the oil and the garlic, then you want to look out for a couple of more recipes which feature that combination, such as a pissaladière and also the Italian pasta puttanesca, which is tarts pasta, and that features olives and tomatoes and garlic and onions and of course anchovies. I think you'd love it. Now, don't serve it right away. You've got to let it cool down. You want to serve it warm or ideally at room temperature. There's 3 stages to cooking your blanquette. First of all, we start stewing the meat, and then secondly, we add the vegetables. Now, for those of you who aren't experienced cooks, the reason you do it in 2 stages is that meat is going to take a lot longer to cook than the vegetables. Now here I have prepared 2 carrots peeled and sliced, 1 leek sliced, and a small onion with a clove in it. Now always use an oven mitt when you're removing hot lids, and then you're just going to add the onion. Again, don't throw this in because the hot liquid could splash back. You want to be careful when you're adding things to anything with some hot liquid. And then you're just going to stir that in. There you go. Next, our bouquet garni. Now bouquet garni actually means, I don't know, a garnished bouquet, and it's a way of flavouring food. And generally you have fresh herbs, including a bay leaf, a dried bay leaf, that you tie together with a bit of string, but I like to use this. This is actually a tea bag, and in it I put a sort of a selection of herbs. I have some parsley, just sort of shove that in there. There you go. Oops, maybe that's a bit too much because I'm going to leave some space for my thyme. And then I'm going to put in my bay leaf. And yes, you're quite right, that's not terribly graceful, but it doesn't really matter because I'm going to take it out at the end of my meal. In France, they actually sell bouquet garni in little ready-made tea bags because it's used so much in French cooking, so it's pretty nice to improvise. But as I said, if you don't have these tea bags, you can just tie it together with a bit of string, or just leave it in and just pick it out afterwards. So in that goes, and that's going to add lovely flavour to our stew. And we'll just pop the lid back on and leave that for a further 20 minutes. That's plenty of time for the vegetables to finish cooking. The reason you keep your onion whole is that you want that clove that you stick in to really infuse the whole onion with flavour. Actually, while it cooks, it tends to sort of fall apart, but it's much better than sticking a bit of clove in each little slice of onion. Remember to cut the root off last. Now remember I told you about that soup, sort of based on the pasta e fagioli soup from Italy. I'm going to show you how to make it, but first of all I'd like to remind everybody of how to prepare garlic. So this soup's going to use a couple of garlic cloves. And what I do is I cut off the end first of all. Garlic, one clove has actually turned out to be too small one, so I'll just put that one to one side. And then I press down on my garlic clove with the heel of my hand, and that sort of splits that papery peel there. Let's do it on both of them. Now, don't be surprised, it's actually quite oily garlic, so your hands tend to get a little bit sticky. Now here, I'm hoping that you can see this little stem. This little stem you want to take out because that gives that rather overwhelming garlicky taste in your mouth that some people are actually almost allergic to it, so we don't want that, and I'm always discarding those papery bits. And again, if it didn't split, you just want to cut it with your knife. Try to keep your knives nice and sharp so you don't have any problem cutting your vegetables. And there we have it. And then just basically turn them over so that you're on a flat surface and mince them with your knife. Or you can use your garlic press if you like to, but since I'm working with a knife I find it's just as easy just to keep going with the knife rather than looking for another utensil. Plus I always find it's really hard to clean garlic presses afterwards. There we go. Now I'm keeping my fingers in this kind of claw-like way so there's no possible likelihood of chopping my fingers as I go. And there we are. Now, especially when I'm teaching the kids in cooking class, I always tell them to use another knife to take those bits off that get stuck to the knife, because otherwise they might cut themselves. Okay, so I really don't know what you're going to call this soup. I just, bean and beet soup or something, or I guess you can come up with something a little bit more romantic than that. I have about a tablespoon of olive oil in this pan, and I'm first of all going to add the stalks. I kind of put these together just because they're going to take longer to cook than the leaves. It doesn't really matter because they're not poisonous or anything, and mix around a bit. And to that I'm going to add the garlic. Now I don't ever or almost never add garlic directly to oil because that's a sure way of burning it. But in goes the garlic, sort of on top of those stems. We're going to mix those around as well. Now if you're not keen on garlic, you can just use some shallots instead if you like, but it is nice to have that little something or other that gives a little punch. Now the other ingredients for this soup are cannellini beans, a little bit of pasta. These are called acini di pepe. They're just little things that sort of bulk it out, but if you don't want to use pasta, you don't need to. You can actually use cooked rice if you like, just add that in at the end. And I have about 4 cups of vegetable stock. If you don't have vegetable stock, don't worry, just use water and make sure you season it with lots of salt and pepper. Okay. Now I'm going to add my beans. Well, I guess I'll get the rest of those out in a bit. Give those a little swirl as well so that they get the flavour of the olive oil and the garlic, and then I'm going to heat it up a little bit so I hear a sizzle. And meanwhile I'm going to chop up my beet leaves. Now if you've ever cooked with fresh spinach, you know that a huge amount of spinach sort of wilts down to nothing. Exactly the same with these leaves, the reason being they're pretty much made up of water. Here I've got a few stalks left in there. I mean, this is really me inventing food. I like to go into my fridge and see what I have hanging around and then sort of cook it all up together. The last thing I ever want to do is throw things away. It's really against my religion, and my religion is food, of course. There we go. Or you could tear these with your hands in a sort of rustic, peasanty sort of way. There we go. Alright, this should be sizzling a bit by now. Go on, sizzle. Now Now the cooking time for your soup really depends on how long it takes your pasta to cook. If your pasta takes 9 minutes, then put the pasta in with the stock, and then after 5 minutes just add the leaves. They really don't take too much cooking time. And this is something that you cook and then eat right away. So I'm going to add my stock. In fact, I'm going to give it a little stir because it looks like the powder has gone to the bottom. I'm quite unashamed about the fact that I use, for convenience, stock that comes in a jar. I think that's fantastic. If I have time, I'll make stock, but this is sometimes all about convenience. And the great thing about this is that everything you can keep in your store cupboard. The only fresh thing that you're adding really is the garlic, which you can store for several weeks anyway, and these leaves. Now I actually put the stock in the microwave for a couple of minutes so it would be hot again. If you remember, the idea is to put hot stock in with your soup so it doesn't take so long to come up to the boil. And then I'm going to add my pasta. This is the pasta I put in all my soups, not all my soups, but any soup that requires pasta. This I put in my minestrone, for example. And I'm just putting in a handful or so, not too much. We don't want to overwhelm it with the pasta. This soup is very satisfying. There we go. And after 5 minutes, we're going to add those leaves. And if you don't have the beet leaves, you can of course add things like kale or spinach, arugula. Anything green is so good for you. Okay, now after 5 minutes, the finishing touch, you're just going to add those greens to your pot. And as I said, it's going to seem like a lot to begin with, but they will wilt down, and then cook for a further 4 or 5 minutes just until the pasta's done and you're ready to serve. It's as simple as that. Now that's totally vegetarian. If you want to sort of add a bit of protein, some pancetta or bacon bits, sort of lightly fried, that's really good with it as well. Or even some bits of sausage. Oh, I love it. And it smells really good. So now the third step in our Blanquette de Veau. We're going to transfer all of this, which is the meat and the vegetables, to a dish. Now there's that bouquet garni. I'm going to whip it out before I serve it, obviously. And I'm going to transfer this to the center of my serving dish. I'm going to actually put some noodles around. The noodles are really good for soaking up the creamy sauce. And actually, if I poke at that onion, it kind of falls apart, do you see? If you see it, take that clove out. If not, somebody will get it in their mouth and they should know not to eat it. Now, while I'm reducing the liquid by fast boiling in the pan, I'm going to prepare my liaison. Now, liaison is actually a mixing together of a couple of things. Think of liaison dangereuse, a dangerous union. So what a liaison does is bind a sauce together, and for that we're going to mix 2 egg yolks with some creme fraiche. Now, if you can't lay your hands on some creme fraiche, use sour cream. However, if you know where you can get some creme fraiche, do get it, because actually creme fraiche doesn't curdle. Its properties enable it to be cooked at a higher temperature than any other kind of cream, which is why the French like to use it a lot in their cuisine. So this is 1/3 of a cup of creme fraiche, which I am going to whip gently in with my egg yolks. Okay. And then I'm going to add the juice of half a lemon. Now, if you're juicing citrus, always have your citrus at room temperature, at least that would be ideal. And what I like to do is kind of roll it on the countertop like this. That gets the juices running. Then cut it in half. When you're juicing, cut it in half, always on the horizontal, not lengthwise. And then I'm just going to use my electric juicer because it's faster. Now, electric juicers are not expensive and they really are efficient at getting every last bit of juice out of your citrus. Okay, and pour that into your cream and egg yolk mixture. Now what we haven't done yet is season, so you want to season quite liberally. I would say a good, that's not a real teaspoon, so like a couple of teaspoons of salt and a good old crank of the peppermill. There we go, mix that together. Check your seasoning just before you serve the sauce, just to make sure you put in enough salt. Okay, now back to our pan. As you can see, the sauce has reduced quite a bit. That's why you do that rapid boiling. It evaporates off because we don't want it too runny. We want it slightly thick. And then we're just going to add the yolks and the cream. And the magic of chemistry is going to let that thicken ever so slightly, just like when you're making a custard, for example. Now, I really don't like to waste anything, so I want to scrape every last bit in. I'm even going to take a bit of that creme fraiche that got left inside my measuring cup. That's really what you should do. And then just let that heat gently. And it's never a bad thing to have a lot of sauce, because then you can reheat your stew if there's any left the next day. Now actually, if you do have leftovers, add a little bit of stock to this the next day, just to make sure you've got enough liquid. Okay, we're going to let that bubble very gently, and then we're going to move on to finishing the dessert. I'm going to make some crème chantilly now. Crème chantilly is whipped crème fraîche. When I first had this, I was a little girl in Paris with my parents, and I remember we were on the Champs-Élysées, that very stupendous long avenue in Paris, and we were having dessert, which was fresh fraises des bois, which are little wild strawberries, and cream. And I was taken aback by the taste of this cream, because crème fraîche has a slightly sour taste, and you really need to develop a liking for it. But as soon as you do, I don't think you'd ever go back, personally. It's that quintessential taste of France, basically. So I'm going to show you how to do it. Crème chantilly, whipped cream. So this again is my old faithful crème fraîche, which of course you buy locally. You don't have to ship in from France. It's very thick. And then we're going to whip it until it just holds, and add a little bit of sugar and some vanilla. Whipped my cream very, very thick, because I'm going to do something fun with it. I'm actually going to pipe it onto my pears. Now to this, because it's got that little sort of bite to it, you want to add some sugar, powdered sugar. If you add granulated sugar, it's going to be sort of gritty, so powdered sugar is the way to go. And about a third of a cup of that. And then also a teaspoon of vanilla, but I'm just going to gingerly stir that in. See, I don't want to lose any of that nice firmness in my cream. Oh, and I know it's very tempting to lick this, but probably better off we have this actually in the bowl. There we go. Up. See how carefully I'm going? And then a teaspoon of vanilla. No imitation, the real thing, please. Okay, now here's the fun thing. I'm going to put it in a piping bag. The reason I'm doing this is because I bought this piping bag in Paris, and a friend of mine sent me off. It wasn't a wild goose chase, I guess, but it was part of our itinerary to go and to track down these specialty cooking shops and to buy a 45cm piping bag for her. So once I got one for her, I had to have one for myself. Now, piping bags are useful for all sorts of things. Cake decorating, piping mashed potato on something to make it look fancy, and also for piping cream onto our pears. That's how we're going to use it today. Now, this is nice and stiff. If you don't have a piping bag, don't worry about it. You can use a Ziploc bag. Now my piping bag's ready. I'm twisting the top like this, and I'm going to put it in the fridge until I'm ready to serve my dessert, because if you put it on too early, then it starts to sort of melt into the sauce and it doesn't look so dramatic. And now we're ready to serve up. It's all ready. I can't wait. I'm going to test that sauce, as I said, for seasoning. Oh, that's perfect. The tang of the lemon. Even if it's a little bit salty now, once it's gone over the meat and the pasta, it's going to be great. Now, if you don't want to do noodles, you can do rice. That's another classic accompaniment to this. And I found that little clove, actually, and I took it out. There we go. And you can even serve more of this sauce on the side. Now, as far as wine is concerned, I would suggest you serve a Saint-Joseph from the northern Rhone region. A Saint-Joseph is made with the Syrah grape in general. It'll be wonderful with it. Or just any wine that you like. It really doesn't matter. White wine would go perfectly well. You're going to love this dish. So let's have a look at what we made today. Here's our soup. Of course, the finishing touches to any kind of soup is a little bit of Parmesan cheese just grated on top there. You can even add, if you like, a little drizzle of olive oil. Oh, that looks delicious. Very good, very good. Now, our enchilade. Either you can take a little spreader and spread it on like that, and of course I'm going to be very messy now. That is so good. My husband's going to love this. You can take your celery and dip it in. It's like a boat, you know, you can have a little bit along there and slurp it up like that. I always like to sort of leave in a few little bits of baby celery because it looks so pretty in the presentation. Or some carrots, or even some broccoli florets would look nice. You could really get the enchilade inside those florets. And we have our Blanquette de Veau. Doesn't that look lovely? And here are our pears. Let me move that out of the way so that you can see. Just for presentation purposes, I left in the cinnamon stick and the bay leaf. You don't need to do that. Even you can put some nice fresh mint leaves in that if you want. And look at that absolutely beautiful scarlet red. Now let's get that cream out of the fridge. Good. Be careful to hold the tip of the piping bag upwards so it doesn't come out, and I'm just going to pipe a little bit on. Oh, look at that. That sort of, oopsie, squeeze that a little better. There we go. That finishing touch, which apparently isn't going to happen. So there we have it. Thank you so much for watching my show. This is the European Palette, and I'm Liz Harcharek.